I think the force is definitely with you. Okay. I think there was a timely reminder there to make sure our phones are off, or at least on silent. Okay, can I just ask, how many people came to the film that was shown here recently, Drill Baby Drill?
I've seen it in Balcombe.
Seen it in Balcombe, or somebody's seen it before? Okay, about 30% of you or so. Okay, how many have actually attended any kind of talk or presentation on hydraulic fracturing? Okay, about 30% again as well. Okay, in theory. Oh, really? In theory, this should probably be the most educated audience that I have spoken to. Because although I've delivered some 70-odd talks around the country, I specifically targeted areas that weren't yet aware of the danger that was fast approaching them. So what I'm going to do during the course of the evening is I'm going to make sure that I'm covering some new ground for those of you that have seen presentations on fracking before. So in the first half it may seem as though I'm sort of going out into a wider arena, but bear with me, because I can assure you that all of the dots will join up. And what we're going to do is I'm going to talk till just after about 5 o'clock, and then we're going to take a break, and I think there's some food being laid on. And then Simon's going to open up the second session around about 6 or so. And then I'm going to get into some much greater detail about what's occurring here, and basically what's occurring in terms of how we can make sure that we absolutely destroy the political and investor will, because we have to tackle both of these, how we can destroy the political and investor will to shut this industry down. Now, of course, anybody who has seen anything of hydraulic fracturing should realise that it's a complete and utter no-brainer. But it seems that, you know, we have some socio-psychopaths with their hands on the wheel at the moment who are determined to unleash this upon us. But that said, the last 11 days have been absolutely seminal. The last 11 days has seen something occur that hasn't really occurred for some 231 years. And that is, the British Parliament actually recognised that the will of the people was somewhat different to that of the sitting Prime Minister. And so when, Thursday week ago, David Cameron set up the debate in Parliament to secure the parliamentary vote to enable him to say, yes, we'll come with you, Mr. Obama, and we'll join this hell that we want to unleash upon the Syrian people, it didn't quite go according to plan. Now, there is no question that the will of the people just was not there, and I think we all sense that. But of course, if you followed the mainstream media, particularly the right-wing media like the Sun, the Mail and the Telegraph, you could have been forgiven for thinking that the vast majority of people in this country had a bloodlust. Well, through the various alternative medias, and there was no coordination here, but there were a number of different groups, all not getting together, but all intent on the same thing, which was making sure that the parliamentarians absolutely had no doubt whatsoever that the will of the people did not support in any way, shape or form an attack on Syria, or Britain being involved in the attack on Syria. The MPs that were targeted, primarily targeted, were the MPs that came into Parliament in 2010. Now, this is a classic case of the bigger agenda actually backfiring on those who think they rule the roost. Because in 2009, the expenses scandal, which had been building for some time, it had been built up over 14 years, and it was being saved as an ace to be played at an appropriate juncture. And there were a number of reasons that it was played. One of the reasons that it was played in 2009 was to take the debate about Britain's membership of the EU off of the front pages of the mainstream media. The other reason for this agenda being unleashed at that time was to cull some of the long-serving politicians who were regarded as a complete waste of space. And they were culled very effectively, which gave both parties, but particularly the Tories, the opportunity to bring in some new blood. But over the last 3 years, they haven't exactly used that new blood to best effect. And these new MPs actually have a collective noun for themselves. They call themselves the division meat. Because they are treated with disdain by senior civil servants and senior parliamentarians. And they have found it very difficult to really get involved in the political process. A classic example is Dr. Sarah Wollaston, who is the MP for South Hams in Devon. It's the Totnes constituency. She is a doctor, a GP, a mother of 3, and she entered Parliament, she stood for Parliament, with the specific intent of getting involved in NHS reform. Of course, she was also interested in representing the local community, but she wanted to contribute to the bigger picture. And once she was elected, and she let it be known that she would like to get involved in NHS reform, basically she was told, don't even think about it. You've got too much of a vested interest, too much knowledge, you're not going to get anywhere near a committee looking at NHS reform. And that's just one example. But that's been pretty much the case with a lot of these MPs. So these MPs were targeted with not just emails, but with phone calls. Their researchers were called, letters were written, letting it be known that if they were going to support David Cameron in his call for an attack on Syria, without seeing absolute irrefutable evidence that Assad had indeed been responsible for that chemical weapon attack on the 21st of August, 21st, then they themselves would be committing a war crime. Now there was also obviously a lot of other groups, a lot of individuals making contact with their MPs, and collectively what it did was it meant that 32 Tory MPs didn't show up. There are various excuses. The best one is we didn't hear the division bell. Well, if you got your iPod in there, I guess you're not going to, are you? But there were 30 Tory MPs who resisted the party whip. And make no mistake, that was a 3-line whip vote last Thursday. They resisted the party whip and voted against the leader, and the bulk of the 30 were from the new intake. This is the first time since, I think it's 1782, that Parliament has not supported the Prime Minister in a call for support for military action. The right-wing media now has its tail between its legs. It is the first time that the Murdoch press has lost a campaign. This is seminal. This is seminal. Because MPs up until now have worked on the basis that the electorate is there to get them elected, and then they will do basically whatever it is that they're told to do by the party whip for the duration that they're in office. But what is happening, we are seeing a regeneration of people taking responsibility. People actually recognising that it's no longer enough for them just to say, well, there's nothing that I can do. What can you do? You're just one person. That's not an untrue observation. As an individual, there's not very much that we can do, but as an individual and then as a collective, we can be absolutely awesome. So what manifested last Thursday was this absolutely awesome result. And take into account, it was just 7 votes. The majority was 13. It was 285 to 272. If just 7 people had voted differently, right now we would be pretty much in World War III. But we're not. Because the will of the people got through to the electorate. It's very clear that Barack Obama was planning to use the David Cameron vote, because the assumption was that he was going to get the majority, and Obama was going to use that to effectively browbeat the Senate and Congress into agreeing to support his limited campaign against Syria. Of course, he hasn't got that mandate, which has given more and more time for other information to come out. And again, you know, there's nothing that you can actually lay your hand on and say this is absolutely categorically what happened. But what is interesting is that there are now numerous sources reporting that it's looking increasingly likely that what actually happened was a very unfortunate accident. Because it looks as though what happened was that the chemical weapons were actually gifted to the rebels, who of course are financed by the US and the UK anyway, but they were gifted to the rebels by Prince Bandar of Saudi Arabia. Unfortunately, he forgot to pass on the handling instructions. And so